Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. Trump wants to continue stirring up trouble for China, but on major issues such as the tariff war, due to the actual situation in the United States being unsustainable, he has to negotiate with China and significantly roll back tariffs. This has already been seen by foreign media as a loss of momentum. The State Department, which is essentially the U.S. Foreign Ministry and is now run by Trump's loyal follower, Secretary Rubio, has mobilized various overseas missions to attack China. Recently, the U.S. Embassy in Singapore tried to smear China, but it backfired. On May 19th, the U.S. Embassy in Singapore posted a video on social media actually comparing China's claims in the South China Sea to clutter piling up in the corridors of Singapore's public housing, known as HDB flats. They were clearly trying to sow discord between China and Singapore. The 90-second video was released by Melanie Harris, the U.S. Embassy's chargé d'affaires in Singapore, and was shared by the embassy's official account on the 19th. At the beginning of the video, several familiar scenes of Singapore's HDB flats are shown, while a narrator says, "Home is my sanctuary." When we live together, respecting each other's space and our shared public spaces is crucial. Then the tone of the video suddenly shifts, and it asks viewers to imagine coming home one day and discovering a certain situation, which is then depicted in the video. Several images of HDB common areas cluttered with junk, along with related news reports, are shown. The narrator says, "What comes to mind when your neighbor decides to claim the space in front of your door as their own?" After they set up the U.S. Embassy finally reveals its true intention string to stir up tensions in the South China Sea and sow discord among neighbors. The video then shifts to the South China Sea conflict, citing foreign media reports on the South China Sea issue and the so-called South China Sea arbitration case. Suddenly, the video blurts out that such things can also happen. The U.S. Embassy right at Singapore's doorstep then draws a comparison to the newly built HDB flats in Singapore, forcibly linking the South China Sea issue to them. At the end of the video, it declares that what's important is to remember that we must use this one corridor and that we must coexist peacefully. The report on May 20 described how the actions of the U.S. Embassy were ridiculed by Singaporean netizens. Most of the comments in the section opposed the U.S. creating rifts between China and Singapore. Quite a few netizens also criticized the U.S. for always acting in the name of America, saying they should look in the mirror before accusing others. One Singaporean netizen commented that the U.S. is always about war and urged them not to drag Singapore into their competition with China. The United States has numerous military bases around the world and likes to create divisions between countries to profit from war. One netizen even directly criticized Casey Mays, the U.S. chargé d'affaires in Singapore, saying, "You are not suitable to be a diplomat in Singapore." Many other netizens also exposed America's hypocrisy, calling the U.S. a hypocritical loser. They also questioned how the United States could actually claim to believe in international law. One person even brought up the Gaza issue, criticizing the U.S. for playing politics on one hand, accusing China, while on the other hand, condoning Israel's destruction of and takeover of Gaza. One netizen went even further, telling the U.S. To take a good look in the mirror first, saying you should educate your own boss. For example, when U.S. President Trump tried to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the American Gulf, and calling Canada the 51st state is just one of countless such actions. Some people even sarcastically asked who funded the production. Was it the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID? Given the Trump administration's drastic budget and staff cuts, USAID's own situation is actually quite precarious. South China Morning Post also mentioned that some netizens joked that this video was tailor-made for Singaporean audiences. A brilliant piece of propaganda. Meanwhile, Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement rejecting foreign embassies' attempts to stir up domestic sentiment in Singapore over international issues involving third countries. The statement emphasized that complex problems should be resolved through proper channels to ensure the effectiveness of diplomatic efforts. Recently, the U.S. has repeatedly failed in its attempts to smear China over the South China Sea issue. On May 20th, Geng Shuang, chargé d'affaires of China's permanent mission to the UN, spoke at the Security Council's open debate on maritime security. Geng Shuang said the Security Council is not the right venue to discuss the South China Sea issue. Although China opposes this, it has also responded. First, under the banner of freedom of navigation, the United States frequently sends military ships and aircraft to the South China Sea to flex its muscles and openly sows discord among regional countries. The United States is, in fact, the greatest threat to security and stability in the South China Sea. Second, China is committed to properly handling maritime disputes through dialogue and consultation with the relevant parties based on respect for historical facts and international law. Third, thanks to the joint efforts of China and ASEAN countries, the current situation in the South China Sea remains generally stable. China and ASEAN are both determined and capable of making the South China Sea a sea of peace, friendship, and cooperation. Fourth, the U.S. side must adhere to its commitment to the One China principle. In conclusion, Geng Shuang emphasized, I would like to remind the U.S., a representative, I don't know if you noticed, but your remarks seem quite out of place compared to those of other countries just now. The Secretary General and everyone else focused their statements on how to maintain maritime security and promote international cooperation. However, the U.S. used this opportunity to make insinuations, attack other countries, and smear and suppress them. We hope the United States can work with other countries to play a constructive role in maintaining maritime security. A few observations. First, the biggest flaw in the U.S. ambassador to Singapore's post is that the bad neighbor metaphor actually fits the United States even better. China, Singapore, and ASEAN are all neighbors in the South China Sea, so it's not surprising there are some disputes. In contrast, the U.S. is the one coming from 108 miles away to stir up trouble. They are fundamentally outsiders. As for harassing neighbors, isn't it the U.S. that has stationed troops in Singapore? Not only are they in the corridor, but they filled it with their own stuff. This is outright occupying someone else's home. Second, Trump has been violating international law everywhere, seizing territories and occupying other people's land. U.S. diplomats have no grounds to accuse China of being the aggressor. As the people of Singapore, is it the U.S. or China that has the image of a hegemon? Third, it's not just that it's hard to convince the public in other countries' U.S. Diplomats also lack credibility when trying to uphold justice in international organizations. Additionally, it's worth noting that on May 20th, the China-ASEAN Special Economic and Trade Ministers meeting was held online, where the economic and trade ministers from both sides made a joint announcement. They have completed negotiations for version 3 of the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area. Foreign media say while trade tensions between China and the U.S. persist, stronger trade ties are strengthening China's regional influence. At the beginning of April, U.S. President Trump wielded the tariff stick against the whole world. Afterwards, he announced a suspension of reciprocal tariffs, but continued to threaten all countries with renewed high tariffs if they did not engage in trade negotiations with the U.S. after a 90-day period. Before the suspension period ended, specifically before July 9, many countries, including ASEAN nations, sought to reach trade agreements with the United States during this window. Xu Weijun, a researcher at the Public Policy Research Institute of South China University of Technology, said that he believes the timing of the conclusion of the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area 3 negotiations is crucial. He pointed out that the timing was carefully chosen, noting that although negotiations began several years ago, the tariff shock from Trump in April may have made China and ASEAN more aware of their shared interests. Accelerating the negotiation process and announcing it now, this is significant news. Xu Weijun said that as the United States is launching a global tariff war, China can use this trade agreement as proof of ASEAN's independence and as evidence that ASEAN is implicitly refusing to take orders from Washington. He pointed out that before any future tariff negotiations with the United States, China has achieved yet another victory in trade diversification. A report released by Rhodium Group at the end of April shows that since the U.S.-China trade war initiated during Trump's first term, ASEAN has become the largest destination for Chinese manufacturing foreign direct investment based on the number of announced trade deals. The data indicates that over 86% of the total investment has flowed into the automotive industry. Information and communication technology, electronics, renewable energy equipment, and consumer goods are major sectors. In 2024, China and ASEAN were each other's top trading partners for the fifth year, with trade rising 7.8% to $982.3 billion. Xu Weijun noted Hong Kong, China signed a free trade agreement with ASEAN. Leveraging its position as a major transshipment port and financial center, Hong Kong can facilitate trade flows between mainland China and ASEAN. It was mentioned that Hong Kong and ASEAN have long-standing ties, and Hong Kong is also capable of promoting the use of RMB in trade settlements while serving as an arbitration center for the region. It is believed that this will further enhance the China-ASEAN trade agreement in the future. This will provide support for small and medium-sized enterprises and hold significant importance for the regional economy. Before the White House announced the suspension, Southeast Asian countries were among those hit hardest by the reciprocal tariffs imposed by the United States. Among them, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam faced tariffs of 49%, 48%, and 46% respectively. Professor Xin Cheng from the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University in Shanghai said, After the upgrade of the China-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, it will become a powerful bargaining chip for both sides in negotiations with the United States. He believes that as China and ASEAN continue to strengthen bilateral trade, and considering the large scale of other economies, he hopes that Trump can understand the impact his tariff war has on U.S. international trade. He added that ASEAN absolutely must not fall into the trap of divide and conquer set by the United States and must unite to respond. As for Washington, a trade agreement could also be beneficial for ASEAN. In negotiations with the United States, ASEAN has become more united because the U.S. will put pressure on ASEAN to pick a side. And before the breakthrough in China-U.S. economic and trade talks and the announcement of a truce on May 12, Trump had announced a 145% tariff on goods imported from China. The small value exemption policy for both Hong Kong and mainland China expired on May 2, and Chinese shipping companies have also become a thorn in the side of the Trump administration, facing the prospect of being charged high fees. Previously, various industries in the United States had issued warnings that the tariff policy against China would severely damage the U.S. economy and the lives of consumers. To put it simply, the conclusion of the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area 3 negotiations was announced at a carefully chosen moment. This will become a powerful bargaining chip for China and ASEAN countries in trade negotiations with the United States. To put it bluntly, it is China using its own tough countermeasures as an example. This boosts ASEAN's confidence. When facing Trump's blackmail, they will have greater strength to counterbalance it, thereby further enhancing the influence of China and ASEAN.